Sometimes life saves its biggest surprises for when you've stopped expecting anything at all. Wes Hanley thought he'd seen his last rodeo, a broke cowboy in his 40s, alone and tired of fighting. When his uncle died and left him nothing but a falling-apart ranch and a half-blind donkey named Clyde, it felt like life's final joke. The land was worthless. The house was crumbling. That stubborn old donkey kept digging up the orchard for no good reason. Until one morning, Wes followed Clyde to a hole and found something impossible: gold bars, decades old, buried deep in the dirt. But the gold was just the beginning. What else had his uncle hidden on that forgotten piece of land? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The lawyer's office in Midland smelled like old paper and air conditioning that never quite reached the corners. Wes Hanley sat in a chair that squeaked every time he shifted his weight, his hat resting on his knee, watching dust motes drift through a shaft of afternoon sunlight. The lawyer, a thin man named Patterson with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, shuffled through papers with the kind of practiced slowness that came from billing by the hour. Your uncle was quite a character. "Mr. Hanley," Patterson said, not looking up. Virgil kept to himself mostly, but he was very specific about his wishes. Wes didn't respond right away. He hadn't seen Uncle Virgil in nearly 15 years. Not since that Christmas, when his marriage was falling apart and everything in his life seemed to be crumbling. Virgil had told him then, in that quiet way of his, that a man could lose everything and still find a way forward. Wes hadn't believed him. He'd been too angry, too wrapped up in his own failures. Now Virgil was gone, died alone in that ranch house out in the middle of nowhere. And Wes was the only family left to notify. "The property consists of 80 acres in Crockett County," Patterson continued, sliding a folder across the desk. "The house, a barn, some outbuildings, all in need of repair, I'm told. There's also livestock, well, one animal, a donkey named Clyde." Wes opened the folder and looked at the pictures. The ranch house sat on a low hill, its paint peeled away by decades of West Texas wind. The barn leaned slightly to one side, like an old man favoring a bad hip. The orchard, he remembered that orchard from when he was a boy, looked skeletal, the trees twisted and sparse. "What's the land worth?" Wes asked. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "In its current condition? Perhaps 50,000 if you find the right buyer. The area's not exactly prime real estate. Water's scarce, soil's not great for much. Your uncle ran some cattle years ago, but that's long past. 50,000. Wes had debts that totaled twice that. He'd lost his own place 3 years back, a small ranch outside Abilene that he'd bought when times were good, and his wife still believed in him. When the marriage ended, so did everything else. Sarah took half of what little remained, and his daughter Kelly, smart, beautiful Kelly, sided with her mother. He couldn't blame her. He'd been absent even when he was present, chasing rodeos in his youth, then chasing work that never quite paid enough. "There's also this," Patterson said, producing an old pocket watch from the folder. "Your uncle specified it should go to you." Wes took the watch carefully. It was tarnished silver, heavy in his palm, with initials engraved on the back, VH. The watch had stopped at 3:47, though Wes didn't know if that meant anything. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it, the weight of all those years. "He wanted you to have it all," Patterson said, his voice softer now. "Said you were the only one who understood what it meant to start over." Wes pocketed the watch and signed the papers. An hour later, he was driving west on Highway 10 in his 15-year-old pickup truck, everything he owned packed in the bed under a tarp. The radio crackled with static between stations, and the air coming through the window tasted like dust and distance. The ranch was 40 miles from the nearest town of any size, accessible by a dirt road that wound through mesquite and scrub brush. When Wes finally turned onto the property, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. The house looked even worse in person than in the photographs. Windows cracked, porch sagging, roof missing shingles like gaps in an old man's smile. He parked in front of the barn and sat there for a moment. engine ticking as it cooled, looking at what his uncle had left him. This was it. This was all that remained of Virgil Hanley's 78 years on Earth, a piece of land that nobody wanted, and a donkey that probably should have died years ago. As if summoned by the thought, the donkey appeared from behind the barn. Clyde was grey and weathered, with a cloudy left eye that gave him a perpetually skeptical expression. He stopped about 20 feet from the truck and regarded Wes with the kind of patient judgment that only donkeys and disappointed mothers could manage. "You must be Clyde," Wes said. Stepping out of the truck, the donkey flicked an ear but didn't move. Wes walked past him toward the house, feeling the animal's good eye following him. The front door wasn't locked, probably nothing out here worth stealing. Inside, the air was stale and warm. Dust covered every surface. The furniture was simple. A couch that had seen better decades, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, a wood stove in the corner that looked like it predated electricity. Virgil's clothes still hung in the bedroom closet. His boots sat by the door, worn down at the heels. It felt wrong being here in the space where his uncle had lived alone all these years. Wes wondered what Virgil had done with his days, what he'd thought about in the evenings. The house offered few clues. There were books, westerns mostly, some history, and a radio on the nightstand. A Bible with cracked leather binding. Photographs in frames on the dresser. Wes picked up one of the photographs. It showed Virgil as a younger man, maybe in his 40s, standing with his arm around a woman Wes didn't recognize. They looked happy. He'd never heard Virgil mention a wife or girlfriend. There were other photographs too. Virgil with groups of men, serious-faced and formal, like military photos, but not quite. In one, Virgil stood in front of a small airplane, desert stretching behind him. A sound from outside pulled Wes from his examination. He went to the window and saw Clyde near the orchard, pawing at the ground with one hoof. The donkey would dig for a moment, then stop and look around, then dig again. Wes left the house and walked down to where the orchard spread across a gentle slope. Most of the trees were dead or dying, though a few still showed signs of life. Green shoots pushing through cracked bark, a handful of small apples clinging to branches. Clyde was focused on a spot between 2 trees, scraping away loose dirt with surprising determination. "What are you doing, old man?" Wes asked. The donkey ignored him and kept digging. Wes stood there as the sun touched the horizon, watching this half-blind animal work at the earth like he was trying to reach something specific. It seemed pointless, but then again, most things did these days. That night, Wes made camp in the house with a sleeping bag on the couch and a can of beans heated on the wood stove. He hadn't brought much. Some clothes, his tools, a box of personal items that had survived the last 3 years of moving from one temporary job to another. He'd worked on ranches all over Texas and New Mexico, always the hired hand, never the owner. He knew horses and cattle, could fix fences and repair equipment, but none of it had added up to anything permanent. His phone had 1 bar of signal, barely enough. He thought about calling Kelly, but what would he say? That he'd inherited a worthless ranch from an uncle she barely remembered? That her father was now officially as broke as he'd ever been? She had her own life in Dallas, a job at a law firm, a son Wes had only seen twice. She'd made it clear 3 years ago that she was tired of his excuses and his failures. The watch sat on the table beside him, catching the lamplight. Wes picked it up again, studying the engraving, the stopped hands. Virgil had been particular about things, careful. Why leave this watch specifically? Why leave everything to a nephew he hadn't seen in 15 years? Outside, Clyde brayed once, a sound that cut through the darkness like a rusty hinge. Wes went to the window but couldn't see anything beyond the small circle of light from the porch bulb. The land stretched out into blackness, empty and vast, the same land Virgil had looked at every night for decades. Wes returned to the couch and lay down, but sleep didn't come easy. The house made settling noises, creaks and groans like old bones. He thought about tomorrow, about figuring out what could be salvaged, what could be sold. The lawyer had mentioned a buyer in Ozona who might be interested in the land for hunting leases. $50,000 wouldn't solve all his problems, but it would give him breathing room, time to figure out what came next. Somewhere in the early hours, Wes finally drifted off, dreaming of dust and distance, of roads that went nowhere and everywhere all at once. He woke to sunlight streaming through dirty windows and the sound of Clyde braying insistently outside. Wes checked his phone. 6:47 a.m. The donkey was making a racket that echoed off the barn walls. Wes pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, not yet touched by the heat that would build through the day. Clyde stood in the orchard again, in the same spot as yesterday, pawing at the ground. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," Wes muttered. He walked down to see what had the donkey so interested. The hole Clyde had been working on was deeper now, maybe a foot down. The animal looked at Wes with his good eye, then deliberately stomped the ground twice and snorted. All right, Wes said. "Let me get a proper shovel." He found one in the barn, along with evidence of Clyde's living arrangements. A stall filled with old hay, water and feed buckets that someone, probably a neighbor, had been maintaining since Virgil's death. The barn smelled like animal and age, but it was solid enough, better condition than the house. Back at the orchard, Wes started digging where Clyde had indicated. The earth was dry and hard-packed, requiring real effort. He worked steadily, piling dirt to the side, going down 2 feet, then 3. Clyde watched from a safe distance, occasionally offering an encouraging snort. "This better be worth it," Wes said, pausing to wipe sweat from his forehead. 4 feet down, the shovel hit something that wasn't dirt. The sound was distinctive, metal on metal. Wes's heartbeat picked up. He cleared away more soil, working more carefully now, until he could see the edge of something square and rusted. It took another 20 minutes to excavate the object completely. It was a metal box, about 2 feet on each side, sealed with a padlock that had long since rusted through. Wes pried it open with the shovel blade. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that crumbled at his touch, were 3 bars of gold. Wes knelt there in the dirt, staring at them. Each bar was roughly the size of a brick, stamped with numbers and dates he couldn't quite make out in the morning light. They were heavy when he lifted them, unmistakably real, impossibly present. He looked at Clyde. The donkey blinked his cloudy eye and flicked his ears forward as if to say, "Well, aren't you going to keep digging?" And that's when Wes Hanley realized that his uncle's legacy might be worth more than $50,000 after all. Quite a bit more. Wes carried the gold bars into the house one at a time, checking over his shoulder like a man with a guilty conscience, even though there wasn't another soul for miles. Each bar felt solid and real in his hands, heavy with possibility and danger in equal measure. He set them on the kitchen table and just looked at them for a while, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Gold. Actual gold. Buried in his uncle's orchard by a half-blind donkey who apparently had a better sense of direction than most people. The stamps on the bars were partially worn, but readable. Dates from 1974, serial numbers, and a mark that might have been governmental but wasn't quite. Wes had seen enough movies to know that gold bars were supposed to have certain markings, certain provenances. These looked official, but they also looked like they'd been hidden deliberately, wrapped and buried and meant to stay that way. He went back outside to the hole. Clyde hadn't moved. The donkey stood there like a patient teacher, waiting for a slow student to catch up. Wes looked at the disturbed earth, at the way the hole had been placed precisely between 2 particular trees, and started digging again. 3 feet to the left, his shovel struck another metal container. This one was smaller, more of a lockbox than a trunk, but it held 2 more gold bars and something else. A piece of paper, yellow with age, covered in Virgil's handwriting. The writing was cramped and hard to read, but Wes could make out numbers that looked like coordinates, dates, and what might have been distances. At the bottom, in larger letters, Virgil had written, "Keep looking. The orchard remembers." Wes sat back on his heels, breathing hard from the digging and from something else, a growing sense that he'd stumbled into something much larger than a simple inheritance. His uncle hadn't just owned a failing ranch. Virgil had been hiding something, protecting something. For decades, Clyde walked over to another spot about 30 feet away and began pawing the ground again. "You've got to be kidding me," Wes said, but he picked up the shovel and followed. By noon, Wes had dug in 6 different locations, all indicated by Clyde with the same deliberate certainty. 4 of the spots yielded more gold, 12 bars total now, sitting in his kitchen like they belonged there. The other 2 holes contained only old ammunition boxes, filled with documents too fragile to handle without care, and 1 rusted coffee can with old photographs. Wes's back ached, and his hands were blistered, but he couldn't stop. Each discovery raised more questions. How much gold was there? Where had it come from? And how in the world did a donkey know where it was buried? He sat on the porch steps, drinking water from the pump, watching Clyde graze peacefully near the barn, as if he hadn't just revealed a fortune buried in the dirt. The afternoon sun was brutal, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned thought into molasses. Wes needed to think this through carefully. Gold like this didn't just appear. It came from somewhere, belonged to someone. The fact that Virgil had buried it, hidden it for what looked like 50 years, meant something important. It meant danger. It meant secrets. It meant that other people might come looking. He thought about the lawyer's office, about Patterson's careful reading of the will. There had been no mention of gold, no hint that the property contained anything valuable. Either Virgil had kept it completely secret or, and this seemed more likely, Patterson didn't know about it. Virgil had been deliberate about that, Wes realized. The old man had left the ranch to him with no explanation, no guide, just the property and a donkey, and the assumption that Wes would figure it out. But why? Why not tell someone? Why not claim it, sell it, use it? The answer came slowly, like water seeping through hard ground, because Virgil couldn't. Because the gold was either stolen, hidden, or somehow tied to something he couldn't talk about. And now it belonged to Wes. Along with whatever trouble came with it, Wes went back inside and examined the gold more carefully. He used a knife to scrape gently at 1 bar, testing it. The metal underneath was the same yellow gold as the surface, not plated, not fake. He'd worked around enough wealthy ranchers to have seen gold jewelry, gold belt buckles, even gold spurs once. This was real. He took out his phone and in the weak signal managed to pull up a search for gold prices. Current rate, about $60,000 per kilogram. He didn't know exactly what these bars weighed, but if they were standard size and they looked it, each one would be around 12 kilograms. That meant each bar was worth roughly $750,000. Wes did the math 3 times to make sure he wasn't imagining it. 12 bars. $9 million, give or take. Sitting on his kitchen table in a house with a leaking roof and no air conditioning, and Clyde was still finding more. The realization hit him like cold water. This wasn't just a few bars hidden away for a rainy day. This was systematic. This was a cache. A stockpile, something Virgil had been protecting his whole adult life. The orchard alone might contain dozens more. The barn, the house, the whole 80 acres, any of it could be hiding gold. Wes walked through the house again, looking at everything differently now. The photographs on the dresser weren't just memories, they were clues. The men in those pictures, serious and formal, might have been partners or rivals or witnesses. The woman in Virgil's arm might have known the truth. The airplane in the desert photograph might have been how the gold arrived. In the closet, Wes found a locked trunk under some old blankets. He broke the lock with a screwdriver and opened it. Inside were more documents, more photographs, and a leather journal with Virgil's name embossed on the cover. The journal's pages were filled with entries in the same cramped handwriting from the note in the orchard, dates. Coordinates, cryptic observations that read like code. One entry, dated March 15, 1975, said simply, "Cash secured. See nose, must protect until time is right. See, Clyde." Had Virgil trained the donkey somehow? That seemed impossible. But then again, Wes was sitting in a house with $9 million in gold that a half-blind donkey had led him to. So maybe impossible wasn't the right word anymore. Another entry from 1982, "No one can know." Not yet, the wrong people are still looking. And from 1998, "Getting older. Need to make arrangements. Wes is the only one I trust." Wes closed the journal carefully. His hands were shaking. Virgil had known. The old man had known exactly what he was doing when he left everything to a nephew he hadn't seen in 15 years. He'd known that Wes was broke and desperate and had nowhere else to go. He'd known that Wes would come to the ranch, would stay long enough to notice Clyde, would be curious enough to dig. It was a plan, executed perfectly from beyond the grave, but a plan for what? To give Wes a second chance? To pass on a secret that had consumed Virgil's whole life? To make sure the gold ended up in the right hands before the wrong people found it? Wes looked out the window at the orchard, at the holes he'd dug, at Clyde standing peaceful in the shade. The sun was starting its decline toward evening. He'd been on this property for less than 2 days, and already his entire understanding of his uncle, of the ranch, of his own future, had been turned completely inside out. His phone buzzed, a text message that barely came through. It was from a number he didn't recognize. Heard about Virgil's passing. Need to talk about the property. We'll stop by tomorrow. R. Cole. Wes stared at the message. Who was R. Cole? How did they know about the property? And why did the message feel less like a friendly condolence and more like a threat? He went back outside and found Clyde standing near the barn, watching him with that patient, knowing expression. Wes walked over and stood beside the donkey, both of them looking out at the land as the light turned golden. I think we're in trouble. Old man, Wes said quietly. Clyde flicked his ears and didn't disagree. Wes spent the rest of the evening going through Virgil's house with the kind of attention he should have given it from the start. Every drawer, every shelf, every gap between floorboards became a potential hiding place. The journal had mentioned documentation, evidence, things that needed protecting. If Virgil had hidden gold, he'd hidden other things too. The house revealed itself slowly. Behind a loose board in the kitchen, Wes found a manila envelope containing more photographs, these ones sharper, more recent, showing the property from different angles, with notes written on the back. North fence line, 3 markers. Barn foundation, eastern corner. Each note was cryptic but purposeful, like a treasure map, written for someone who already knew the territory. In the bedroom, under the bed frame itself, Wes discovered a false bottom in one of the floorboards. It took him 20 minutes of careful prying to access the space beneath, where Virgil had stashed a leather-bound journal, different from the first one, older, more detailed. This journal was a revelation. It started in 1974, the same year stamped on the gold bars, and the entries were more narrative than the cryptic notes from the other journal. Virgil had written like a man keeping a record for posterity, or perhaps for confession. The first entry read, "Today changed everything. What we found, what we took, it's enough to set us up for life or get us killed. Maybe both. Jimmy wants to move it immediately. Cole wants to sit tight. I just want to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands again." Further entries painted a picture Wes was still trying to piece together. Virgil and at least 2 other men, Jimmy and Cole, had come into possession of the gold. The circumstances were unclear, but the entries mentioned the recovery, the transport and keeping it safe from them. Who them was remained. Frustratingly vague. One entry from August 1974 was particularly unsettling. Cole is getting nervous. Says people are asking questions. I told him we stick to the plan. Divide it up, hide it separately, wait until the heat dies down. Jimmy agrees with me. Cole doesn't like it, but he'll go along. He doesn't have a choice. Wes sat on the floor with the journal in his lap, the lamp casting shadows that made the room feel smaller. The pieces were starting to fit together. Virgil hadn't stolen the gold, or if he had, it was from people who probably didn't deserve it. He'd been part of a group, a partnership that had fractured over how to handle what they'd found. And Cole, R. Cole, who'd sent that text message, was one of the original partners. That meant Cole knew about the gold. That meant tomorrow's visit wasn't about condolences or property taxes. It was about claiming what he thought was his. Wes kept reading. The entries grew more sporadic after 1975. Months would pass between updates. Then years. But the theme remained consistent. Virgil was waiting for something, protecting something. keeping watch over the gold like a guardian who knew that claiming it outright would bring disaster. A 1989 entry mentioned Jimmy's death. Heart attack, or so they say. Jimmy always said he felt watched, like someone was keeping tabs on us. Now he's gone, and I can't help wondering if it was natural at all. His share is still buried where we agreed. His family doesn't know. Better that way. And then, from 2003, Cole came by today. First time in almost 20 years. He's older, harder. Wants to dig everything up and split it 3 ways. His cut, my cut, and what would have been Jimmy's. I told him no. The time still isn't right. He didn't take it well. I don't trust him. Never did, really, but especially not now. The journal's final entries were from recent years, just a few lines here and there. One from 2 years ago simply said, "Getting too old for this. Need to make sure it goes to someone who'll know what to do." Wes is struggling. Maybe this is his way forward. Maybe I can give him something I never had, a real choice. Wes closed the journal and set it carefully on the floor beside him. His uncle had spent 50 years protecting this secret, waiting for the right moment that never came. And in the end, Virgil had decided that the right moment was now, passed on to a nephew who'd lost everything and needed a second chance. But the journal raised as many questions as it answered. What was the gold originally? Where had it come from? And if Cole was coming tomorrow expecting a share, what would Wes tell him? He needed more information. He needed to understand the full scope of what he'd inherited. Wes spent another hour searching the house, finding smaller caches of documents, old newspaper clippings about a robbery in New Mexico, official-looking papers with government seals that might have been real or forged, letters written in code that Wes couldn't decipher. In one envelope, he found a map, a surveyor's map of the property with hand-drawn marks covering it like a constellation. Some marks were red, some blue, some circled multiple times. Each mark had a number beside it. Wes counted them carefully. 47 marks total, if each mark represented a cache, like the ones Clyde had shown him. And if each cache contained even a fraction of what he'd already found, then the total value of what was buried on this property wasn't $9 million. It was something much, much larger. Wes's hands were shaking again. He spread the map on the kitchen table beside the gold bars and studied it in the lamplight. The marks were distributed across the entire property, the orchard, yes, but also near the barn, along the fence lines, even up on the hill behind the house. Virgil had turned the entire ranch into a vault, hiding pieces of the fortune in dozens of locations so that no single discovery would reveal everything. It was brilliant and paranoid in equal measure. It was the work of a man who knew that secrets didn't stay buried unless you made them impossible to find all at once. Wes pulled out his phone and looked at the text message again. "Need to talk about the property. We'll stop by tomorrow." The tone was casual, but the timing was suspicious. Virgil had been dead for less than 3 weeks. Patterson had said the will reading was rushed through because there were no complications, no contests. But now Cole was reaching out within days of Wes arriving at the ranch. Someone was keeping track. Someone knew that Virgil's heir had finally shown up. Wes went to the window and looked out at the darkness. The moon was up, bright enough to cast shadows across the yard. Clyde was visible near the barn, a grey shape against the darker wood. The land stretched away in all directions, empty and quiet, but it didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like a target, like a secret that too many people knew about. He thought about calling the sheriff, but what would he say? That his uncle had buried gold all over the property, and now someone was coming to claim it? That would lead to questions, official questions, about where the gold came from and whether it was legal to keep. Wes didn't have those answers yet. He thought about leaving, packing up the truck and disappearing with the bars he'd already found. $9 million was more than enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere safe. But running felt wrong. Virgil had trusted him with this. The old man could have left the property to anyone, could have made arrangements to have the gold sold or turned over to authorities. Instead, he'd chosen Wes specifically, knowing what kind of man he was, or what kind of man he might become with the right chance. Wes looked at Virgil's pocket watch sitting on the table. The hands still read 3:47, frozen in time, like the moment Virgil had decided to stop running from whatever he'd been running from. That's what this inheritance was, Wes realized. It wasn't just money. It was Virgil passing on the responsibility of deciding what came next, of finishing what he'd started 50 years ago. The question was, what had Virgil started? And what would Wes do when Cole showed up tomorrow expecting answers? He picked up the journal again and turned to a page near the end. Virgil had written, "The truth is simple. We did what we thought was right. Whether we were right about being right, that's for someone else to judge. I just hope whoever inherits this mess has better sense than we did." Wes closed the journal and looked at Clyde through the window. The donkey was lying down now, content in the moonlight, guarding secrets he couldn't speak but somehow remembered. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more questions, or trouble, probably all three. Morning came too early. Wes woke on the couch with his neck stiff and the journal still clutched in his hand. Sunlight poured through the windows, harsh and unforgiving. He checked his phone, 8:23 a.m., and no new messages. Cole hadn't specified when he'd arrive, just tomorrow, which meant Wes had time to prepare, but no idea how much. He made coffee on the wood stove the old-fashioned way and took it outside to the porch. Clyde was already up and moving, grazing near the orchard like yesterday's discoveries were just routine business. Wes envied the donkey's calm. His own mind was racing, trying to sort through everything he'd learned and figure out what it meant. The photographs. He needed to look at those more carefully. Back inside, Wes spread the pictures across the table, organizing them by what looked like chronology. Some were clearly from the 70s. The clothes, the cars, the quality of the film stock. Others were more recent, though still dated. In one cluster of photos, Virgil appeared with two other men. They stood in front of a small airplane, desert landscape stretching behind them. All three men looked serious, purposeful, like they were embarking on something important. Wes examined their faces. Virgil he knew, of course. Younger, harder, with the kind of lean strength that came from physical work and maybe something more dangerous. The man on the left was shorter, stocky, with dark hair and a wide smile that seemed at odds with the seriousness of the others. Jimmy, maybe. The man on the right was tall, thin, with sharp features and eyes that even in a photograph looked calculating. That would be Cole. Another photo showed just Virgil and the woman from the bedroom picture. They stood on what looked like this very porch, her hand on his arm, both of them smiling. On the back, in faded ink, Mary, 1976. Wes had never heard Virgil mention anyone named Mary. Another secret. Another piece of his uncle's life that had been carefully hidden away. There were other images too. The airplane again, from different angles. Close-ups of its tail number, which Wes wrote down, N7432T. Maps spread on the hood of a truck. Men loading something into a vehicle, their faces turned away from the camera. And one photograph that made Wes's stomach tighten. 3 men digging, their backs to the camera, with what looked like metal containers stacked nearby. This was documentation. Virgil had been building a record, evidence of what they'd done and where they'd hidden it. But why take photos? Why risk creating evidence at all? The answer came as Wes looked at a final photo, this one showing just Virgil standing alone near the barn, older now, probably from the early 2000s. On the back, insurance. If anything happens to me, someone needs to know the truth. Insurance. Virgil had been protecting himself, making sure that if Cole or anyone else came after him, there would be proof of what really happened. And now that insurance belonged to Wes. He gathered all the photos and journals and maps and put them in a saddlebag he found in the barn. Whatever happened when Cole arrived, Wes needed to make sure this documentation was safe. He considered hiding it somewhere on the property, but that felt like repeating Virgil's mistake, scattering everything so far that the full truth became impossible to piece together. Instead, he put the saddlebag in his truck under the seat, where he could grab it and drive if things went sideways. By noon, Wes had done what he could to prepare. The gold bars were wrapped in old towels and hidden in the root cellar beneath the kitchen. accessible through a trapdoor that Virgil had disguised under a rug. The house looked poor and neglected, which was exactly what Wes wanted. Let Cole see a failing ranch and a broke cowboy who didn't know what he'd inherited. At 1:15, a dust trail appeared on the access road. Wes watched from the porch as a black SUV made its way toward the ranch, moving fast enough to kick up dust, but slow enough to suggest the driver knew the road well. The vehicle pulled up in front of the house, and 3 men got out. The first was the one from the photographs, older now, probably mid-70s, but still carrying himself with the kind of sharp awareness that made Wes immediately cautious. Raymond Cole. He wore a Western shirt and expensive boots, the kind of outfit that said money but tried to pass for working rancher. The other 2 men were younger, harder. They didn't say anything, just stood by the SUV with their arms crossed, watching. Security or muscle, Wes couldn't tell which, but it didn't matter. The message was clear. Cole had come prepared for resistance. Wes Hanley? Cole's voice was smooth, practiced. He approached with his hand extended. "Ray Cole, I was a friend of your uncle's. Sorry for your loss." Wes shook his hand briefly. "Mr. Cole, I got your message." Good. Mind if we talk? It's a bit warm out here." Cole gestured toward the house without waiting for an answer, already moving toward the porch like he had a right to be there. Wes blocked his path politely but firmly. "We can talk out here." "What's this about?" Cole stopped, and something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or recalculation. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Fair enough. I'll get right to it. Your uncle and I were partners way back. Business partners. We had an arrangement about this property." "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind where what's on this land belongs to both of us. Half his, half mine. Now that Virgil's gone, I'm here to discuss terms. I'm willing to be reasonable. I'll buy out your inherited share at fair market value, or we can split whatever's here 50-50. Your choice." Wes kept his expression neutral. The will didn't mention any partnership. The property's mine free and clear, according to the lawyer. Cole's smile tightened. "The will doesn't tell the whole story. Virgil and I had an understanding that went back 50 years. I have documentation to prove it." He pulled out a folded paper from his pocket. "This is a partnership agreement, signed by both of us in 1974. It states clearly that anything acquired jointly belongs to both parties equally." Wes took the paper and examined it. It looked official, signatures, dates, even a notary stamp. But something about it felt wrong. The paper was too clean, too pristine for something supposedly 50 years old. And the language was vague, talking about joint acquisitions and shared ventures without specifying what those ventures were. "This doesn't mention the ranch specifically," Wes said. Handing it back. "Doesn't need to. The ranch is where we stored our joint acquisition. That makes it part of the partnership." Cole's voice had an edge now, the friendliness wearing thin. "Look, son, I'm trying to be nice about this. Your uncle was my friend, and I respect that you've inherited his share. But I also know my rights. What's buried on this property is half mine, and I'm prepared to prove it in court if necessary." So Cole knew about the gold, or at least suspected it. That changed things. "I don't know what you think is buried here," Wes said carefully, "but all I've found is a run-down ranch and a stubborn donkey. If you and my uncle had some kind of business together, that ended when he died. The property's mine now. If you want to make a claim on it, talk to my lawyer." Cole studied him for a long moment, and Wes could feel the 2 men by the SUV tensing, ready to move if their boss gave the word. The afternoon sun beat down, and somewhere in the distance, Clyde brayed. "You're making a mistake," Cole said quietly. "Your uncle spent his whole life protecting something that was never fully his to protect. I gave him 50 years of patience. I'm not giving you the same courtesy. Think about my offer. I'll be back in a few days for your answer." He turned and walked back to the SUV. The other men followed, and within moments they were gone, leaving only dust and the faint smell of expensive cologne hanging in the air. Wes stood on the porch, watching until the vehicle disappeared. His hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the adrenaline of confrontation and the realization that this was just the beginning. Cole wasn't going away. He'd spent half a century waiting for this gold, and now that Virgil was gone, he saw his chance. The question was, what would Wes do about it? He walked down to the orchard where Clyde stood grazing. The donkey looked up at him with that patient, knowing expression. "Your friend Virgil left me in a real mess. You know that?" Wes said. Clyde flicked his ears and went back to grazing, unconcerned with human complications. Wes looked at the spots they'd dug yesterday, at the disturbed earth that marked the beginning of whatever came next. He thought about the journal entries, about Virgil's 50 years of waiting, about Cole's implied threats, and he thought about his daughter Kelly in Dallas, about the grandson he barely knew, about the life he'd lost, and the life he might be able to build if he made the right choices now. The sun was starting its decline. Tomorrow, he'd need to do more research, figure out what the gold really was, and whether keeping it was legal or even possible. Tonight, he'd read more of the journals, tried to piece together the full story. But right now, standing in the orchard with a half-blind donkey who somehow remembered 50-year-old secrets, Wes Hanley made a decision. He wasn't running. He wasn't selling. And he sure as hell wasn't giving Raymond Cole a single bar of that gold without knowing the whole truth first. Whatever Virgil had started, Wes was going to finish it. The town of Ozona sat 30 miles east of the ranch, a place where the highway met dusty streets and the pass still clung to storefronts like paint that wouldn't quite peel away. Wes drove in early the next morning, Virgil's journals and the tail number from the photographs tucked in the saddlebag beside him. He needed information, and you didn't get information sitting alone on a ranch, waiting for trouble to find you. The library was a small brick building next to the post office, its parking lot empty except for a tired-looking sedan. Inside, the air conditioning hummed like a promise of civilization, and a woman in her 60s looked up from behind the desk with the kind of smile reserved for people who still used libraries. "Help you find something?" she asked. "I need to use a computer," Wes said. "For research." She pointed him to a row of desktop computers along the wall, and Wes settled in with the kind of grim determination that came from knowing you were looking for something without being sure what it was. He started with the tail number from the airplane, N7432T. The FAA database was public, and within minutes Wes had his answer. The plane was a Cessna 182, registered in 1973 to a company called Desert Sky Transport out of Albuquerque. The registration had lapsed in 1975, and there was no current information about the aircraft's disposition. Desert Sky Transport. Wes searched for the company name and found fragments. A business license that expired in 1976. A mention in an old newspaper article about regional aviation companies. And finally, buried in a digitized archive, a longer article from the Albuquerque Journal, dated October 1974. The headline made his breath catch. "Federal investigation into Desert Sky Transport continues. Gold smuggling. Allegations remain unproven." Wes read the article 3 times, taking notes. Desert Sky Transport had been under investigation for smuggling gold from Mexico into the United States, allegedly working with corrupt officials on both sides of the border. The company's owner, James Hendricks, had denied all charges. No arrests were ever made. The investigation had quietly closed in early, 1975, with no conclusions. James, Hendricks, Jimmy, the smiling man from the photographs, Wes, searched for more information about Hendricks and found an obituary from 1989. Died suddenly of a heart attack at age 52, survived by wife and 2 children. Services private. The same year, Virgil had written that he couldn't help wondering if Jimmy's death was natural. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture that made Wes's stomach tighten. The gold hadn't been legally acquired. It had been part of a smuggling operation, possibly involving federal agents, corrupt officials, and at least 3 men who'd decided to hide it rather than let it fall into the wrong hands. Or maybe they'd just stolen it for themselves. The journals hadn't been clear about whose hands were wrong. Wes kept searching. He found references to a major gold seizure in 1974, $350 million worth, taken from what officials described as a criminal enterprise. But there was something odd about the reports. The gold had been seized, transported to federal custody, and then nothing. No trial, no return to rightful owners. Just silence. He found one more article, this one from 1976, that mentioned the case briefly. Questions remain about the disposition of gold seized in Operation Desert Shield. Federal officials declined to comment, citing ongoing sensitivity. Operation Desert Shield. That was the key phrase. West searched it and found almost nothing. A few oblique references, some redacted documents in military archives, and a pattern of silence that suggested the operation had been classified or buried or both. Virgil had been part of something big, something that had made powerful people nervous. And now, 50 years later, Raymond Cole wanted his share. West sat back from the computer, rubbing his eyes. The library felt suddenly too small, too exposed. If Cole had lawyers and resources, he probably knew all of this already. He'd probably been watching the property for years, waiting for Virgil to die or slip up. And now here was West, the unsuspecting heir, sitting in a public library, looking up information that might as well send up a flare, saying, "I found the gold." He cleared his search history and left the library, the morning sun already fierce enough to make the pavement shimmer. His truck sat in the parking lot like an old friend, battered but reliable. West sat behind the wheel for a moment, thinking. He needed advice. He needed someone who understood the law, who could help him navigate whatever mess Virgil had left him. And there was only one person who fit that description, even if calling her meant admitting he needed help. West pulled out his phone and stared at his daughter's number for a long minute before dialing. Kelly answered on the third ring. "Dad?" Her voice carried surprise and something else, caution maybe, or resigned expectation that this call would be like all the others. Asking for something or making excuses. "Hey, Kelly, I know it's been a while." 6 months, she said. Not accusing, just stating fact. "Are you okay?" Yeah. I'm out in West Texas. Remember Uncle Virgil?" "Barely. Why?" "He died, left me his ranch." There was a pause. "I'm sorry. I know you two were close when you were younger." "We weren't that close," Wes admitted. "That's kind of the problem. He left me this place, and I'm trying to figure out why." "Okay." Kelly's tone shifted, becoming more focused. She was in work mode now, the part of her that was a paralegal at a Dallas law firm. "What's the issue? Estate complications?" "Something like that. Kelly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep it between us." Another pause, longer this time. Dad, what's going on?" Wes took a breath. If someone inherited property and found something valuable on it, something that might have complicated origins, what would their legal standing be? That's vague. How valuable? How complicated? Very valuable. And maybe connected to something that happened 50 years ago. Are we talking about buried treasure? There was a hint of amusement in her voice, like she thought he might be joking, more or less. The amusement faded. "Dad, if you found something on inherited property, it generally belongs to you as the property owner. But if the items were stolen, or have legitimate claims against them from other parties, that changes things. You'd need to establish provenance. And if someone else has a legal claim, what if they have a partnership agreement from 1974, claiming joint ownership of anything acquired?" Kelly was quiet for a moment. That could be enforceable, depending on the language and whether it was properly executed. But partnership agreements usually expire when partners die, unless there are specific provisions for transfer to heirs. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" "Not yet. The guy with the agreement showed up yesterday with 2 friends who looked like they weren't here for conversation. He wants half of whatever's on the property." "Dad," Kelly's voice was sharp now. "Whatever you found, if someone's making legal threats backed by muscle, you need to be careful. Don't make any agreements, don't sign anything, and definitely don't let anyone on the property without documentation. And for God's sake, get a lawyer." "I will. Kelly, this could change things. For both of us. For you and Mason." "What does that mean?" It means Uncle Virgil left me something worth enough to make a real difference. Enough to maybe, I don't know, pick some things. Kelly was quiet for so long that Wes thought the call might have dropped. Finally, she said, "I'm not going to pretend I don't need money. Mason's medical bills are stacking up, and the insurance doesn't cover half of what he needs. But Dad, if this thing you found is dangerous, if people are threatening you, I can handle it. That's what you always say." There was old pain in her voice, old disappointments. "And then you disappear for months, and I don't hear from you until the next crisis. I know. You're right. But this time it's different. This time I'm asking for help before everything falls apart." Another long silence. Then, "Send me pictures of the partnership agreement if you have it, and any other documentation you found. I'll look at it, run it by some people at the firm. But Dad, be careful, please, I will." "Thank you, Kelly." "Yeah." She paused. "Call me in a few days. Update me." "I will." The line went dead. Wes sat there with the phone in his hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of hope. Kelly had listened. She hadn't shut him down, hadn't dismissed him. She'd offered to help. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. Wes drove back toward the ranch, his mind spinning through everything he'd learned. The gold was from a federal seizure, probably connected to Operation Desert Shield, which meant it had belonged to criminals before the government took it. And then Virgil and his partners had taken it from the government, or had been part of the team that seized it in the first place. The truth was still murky, hidden in classified files and 50-year-old secrets. But one thing was clear: Raymond Cole wasn't going away. He'd waited 50 years for this, and now that Virgil was gone, he saw his chance. The fake partnership agreement, or maybe it was real, Wes didn't know yet, was just the first move. There would be others. As Wes turned onto the access road that led to the ranch, he saw something that made him hit the brakes. Fresh tire tracks, multiple vehicles, leading toward his property. The tracks were recent, maybe an hour old. Someone had been here, or was still here. Wes drove forward slowly, his hand reaching for the tire iron under the seat. The house came into view first, looking undisturbed. Then the barn, and there, near the orchard, were 2 ATVs parked in the shade, their riders nowhere visible. Wes parked the truck and got out carefully. "Hey!" he called out. "This is private property." Movement from the orchard. 2 men emerged, young and scruffy, carrying metal detectors. They saw Wes and froze. "Sorry, man," one of them called. "We heard there might be something out here. Didn't think anyone would mind." "I mind," Wes said, walking toward them. "Get off my land, now!" They gathered their equipment and headed for the ATVs, sheepish but not particularly apologetic. As they drove away, one of them called back, "You should post signs if you don't want visitors." Wes stood in the dust they kicked up, watching them disappear down the road. The word was out. Cole's visit had spread rumors, and now people were coming to look. First 2 treasure hunters, next would be more. The secret Virgil had kept for 50 years was unraveling faster than Wes could contain it. He walked to where the men had been searching and found shallow holes dug in the orchard. None of them deep enough to hit anything real. But the message was clear. Time was running out. He needed to act, and soon, before this property turned into a circus, and whatever chance he had of controlling the situation slipped away completely. Clyde appeared from the barn, watching Wes with that calm, patient expression that somehow always made things feel slightly less catastrophic. "We need a plan," Wes told the donkey, "and we need it fast." Clyde flicked his ears and walked past him toward a new spot in the orchard, then began to paw the ground. "Yeah," Wes said, following. "I figured you'd say that." The barn smelled like decades of animal and hay, dust motes floating in shafts of light that leaked through gaps in the walls. Wes had been searching for 2 hours, moving methodically through every corner, every space that might hide something significant. Virgil had been deliberate about everything. The journals, the maps, the photographs, and if there was more to find. The barn seemed like a logical place. He found it behind a false wall in the tack room, disguised so well that only someone looking specifically for hidden spaces would notice the slight gap in the boarding. Behind it was a metal shelf holding a cassette player, 2 tapes, and another journal. This one marked "Final Account" on the cover. Wes carried everything to the workbench and set up the cassette player, which ran on batteries that had long since died. He found replacements in the house and returned to the barn, closed the door and pressed play. There was crackling. Then Virgil's voice, older than Wes remembered it but unmistakable, that same measured cadence, that same careful choice of words. "If you're listening to this, I'm gone. And if you found it, that means you're probably my nephew Wes, because I didn't leave instructions for anyone else. So hi Wes, sorry about the mess I'm leaving you." A pause. The sound of Virgil settling into whatever chair he'd been sitting in. "I need to tell you about 1974, about what we did and why we did it. You deserve to know the truth before you decide what comes next." Wes pulled up a stool and listened, Virgil's voice filling the quiet barn. "I was a federal agent then, working with a task force investigating gold smuggling across the Mexican border. Jimi Hendrix ran Desert Sky Transport, a small aviation company that moved cargo, legal and otherwise. Raymond Cole was the regional director for customs, which meant he had access to everything coming through official channels. And we were all 3 of us tired of watching criminals get rich while good people struggled." Another pause. The tape hissed. The operation was called Desert Shield. We were supposed to intercept a shipment, $350 million in gold bars that had been stolen from legitimate mining operations in South America. The cartel moving it had connections all the way up to federal officials. Our job was to seize the gold and return it to the rightful owners. Virgil's voice grew heavier, but when we intercepted that shipment, we realized the truth. The rightful owners were just different criminals. The entire operation was corrupt from top to bottom. The gold was going to disappear into private collections, into offshore accounts, into the pockets of the same people who were supposed to be stopping this kind of thing. A long silence then. We made a decision. The 3 of us decided that if the gold was just going to be stolen anyway, better it should disappear completely. Better that no one got it, not the cartels, not the corrupt officials, not anyone. So we took it, all of it. We used Jimmy's plane to move it out of New Mexico, brought it here to this ranch that I'd inherited from my father, and we buried it. All $350 million worth. Wes sat very still, barely breathing. The plan was to wait. Wait until the people looking for it moved on, until the investigation closed, until we could figure out a way to return it to people who actually deserved it. But it never happened. Cole got nervous first. He wanted to sell it piece by piece, make ourselves rich. Jimmy and I said no. "That's not what we'd taken it for." Virgil's voice grew harder. "Cole threatened to expose us. I told him if he did, we'd all go down together. So we made an arrangement. We split the gold 3 ways, buried it in different locations. Jimmy took his share to his property in Colorado. Cole was supposed to hide his in Arizona, and I kept the main cash here on my land, because someone needed to guard it." The tape clicked as it changed sides automatically. Jimmy died in 1989. His family never knew what he'd hidden on their property. They sold the land to a developer 5 years later. Whatever gold was there is under a shopping mall now. Cole's share, I never trusted him, so I followed him. He buried his in the desert near Tucson, but when I checked a few years later, it was gone. He dug it up and sold it, made himself rich off what we'd agreed to protect. Bitterness crept into Virgil's voice. That left only my share, the largest share, because I'd been the one holding the operation together. I kept it here, moved it deeper, scattered it across the entire property, so that even if someone found one cache, they wouldn't find it all. And I waited. I waited for the right time, the right person, the right circumstances to make this right. A long pause. The sound of Virgil taking a drink of something. I spent 50 years protecting this gold. Wes, 50 years waiting for a chance to do something good with it. But chances like that don't come when you're hiding from the law. They don't come when you're afraid of shadows. I realize now that I should have made different choices. But I can't undo what I did. All I can do is pass it on to someone I trust. The tape hissed for a moment. You're a good man, Wes. Better than I was at your age. You've had your struggles. made your mistakes, but you've got character. You know what matters. That's why I'm leaving this to you. Not to give you money, though God knows you could use it, but to give you a choice I never had the courage to make." Virgil's voice softened. "The gold is yours now. You can keep it, sell it, turn it in, do whatever you think is right. But know this, Cole will come for it. He's been waiting just as long as I have, and now that I'm gone, he'll see his chance. Don't trust him. Don't believe his partnership claims. We dissolved our partnership the day he dug up his share and betrayed what we'd agreed to protect. The tape wound on for another minute, just breathing. Then, there's more gold here than you've found yet. Clyde knows where most of it is. I trained him over the years. Sounds crazy, I know, but donkeys are smart and they remember. Follow him. Trust him. And whatever you decide to do, know that I'm sorry for putting this burden on you. But I also know you're strong enough to carry it." The tape clicked off. Wes sat in the silence that followed, Virgil's words echoing in his head. A federal agent who'd stolen what he was supposed to protect. A corrupt partner who'd sold out. And 50 years of waiting that had never led to resolution. He picked up the journal marked "Final Account" and opened it. Inside were detailed entries, coordinates, quantities, dates when each cache had been buried or moved. It was a complete inventory of everything hidden on the property. Wes counted carefully. 47 separate caches, ranging from single bars to clusters of 20 or more. At the current price of gold, the total value was staggering. Over 340 million still buried on this land. Cole had taken his share years ago. Jimmy's was under concrete somewhere in Colorado. This was all that remained of Operation Desert Shield. The last third of a fortune that had been stolen from thieves, hidden from the corrupt, and guarded by a man who'd never figured out what to do with it. Now it was Wes's problem. He thought about Virgil's words. You're strong enough to carry it, was he? Wes had spent the last 3 years failing at everything he touched. He'd lost his ranch, his marriage, his relationship with his daughter. He'd been a hired hand drifting from job to job, not even managing to stay in one place long enough to call it home. But maybe that's exactly why Virgil had chosen him. Because Wes had nothing to lose. Because he'd already hit bottom and survived. Because he knew what it meant to make hard choices when all the options were bad. Wes rewound the tape and played it again, listening for anything he might have missed. On the second listen, something clicked. Virgil had said the gold was stolen from legitimate mining operations, taken by cartels, then intercepted by federal agents. That meant somewhere, buried in government archives, there would be records, documentation of who the gold had originally belonged to, where it came from, how it was seized. If Wes could find those records, he might be able to prove provenance. He might be able to return the gold to its rightful owners, or at least establish that Cole had no legal claim to it. But that would require help. It would require resources he didn't have and expertise he didn't possess. It would require... The sound of vehicles pulled Wes from his thoughts. He went to the barn door and looked out. 2 trucks were approaching, not Cole's SUV, but official-looking vehicles with government plates. They pulled up in front of the house, and 4 people got out. 3 men in suits and 1 woman with a badge clipped to her belt. Federal agents. Wes's stomach dropped. The woman approached first, her expression professional but not hostile. "Mr. Hanley? I'm Special Agent Reeves, FBI. We need to talk about your uncle's property." Wes stepped out of the barn, keeping his expression neutral. "What about it?" "We have reason to believe there may be items on this property related to an ongoing investigation. We'd like permission to conduct a search." "What kind of items?" Agent Reeves studied him for a moment. "The kind that have been missing for 50 years, Mr. Hanley. The kind that your uncle spent his life hiding, so they knew. Maybe they'd always known, had been watching Virgil all these years. Maybe Cole had tipped them off. Or maybe, most likely, federal agents didn't forget about 350 million in stolen gold. No matter how much time passed, I'd like to see a warrant," Wes said. Agent Reeves nodded as if she'd expected that. "We don't have one yet. That's why we're asking for cooperation. If you give us permission to search, this can be handled quietly. If we need to get a warrant, it becomes a matter of public record. Media gets involved. Questions get asked. Translation: cooperate or watch your life become a circus. Wes thought about Virgil's message, about the choice he'd been given. He thought about Kelly and her son, about the medical bills she couldn't pay. He thought about the gold buried beneath his feet, waiting for someone to make a decision about its fate. "I need to talk to my lawyer first," Wes said. Agent Reeves pulled out a business card. "You have 24 hours, Mr. Hanley. After that, we come back with a warrant. And once we do that, everything on this property becomes evidence in a federal investigation." She handed him the card and walked back to the trucks. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving dust and ultimatums in their wake. Wes stood in the yard, the card in his hand, Clyde watching from near the orchard. 24 hours to decide. To find a lawyer, figure out his rights, choose whether to fight or cooperate or run. 24 hours to finish what Virgil had started, or lose everything trying. Wes spent the rest of the day in Virgil's house, tearing through every remaining hiding place with the kind of desperation that came from having less than a day to figure out 50 years of secrets. The FBI wouldn't have shown up unless they knew something significant, which meant there was more to this story than Virgil had revealed in his recording. He found it in the last place he thought to look, inside the wood stove itself, wrapped in fireproof cloth and wedged up into the chimney. A sealed envelope addressed in Virgil's handwriting, "For Wes, open only if you found everything." Wes tore it open. Inside were official documents, their edges yellowed with age, but the text still clear. Letters on federal letterhead. Correspondence between Virgil and someone named Mitchell Brennan at the Justice Department. And at the bottom of the stack, a single sheet that made Wes's hands shake as he read it. It was an official memorandum, dated August 1974, classified secret in red letters across the top. The subject line read, "Operation Desert Shield, Final Disposition Report." Wes read it 3 times, each time the words rearranging everything he thought he understood. The memo confirmed what Virgil had said about the gold being seized from criminals. But then it went further. The gold hadn't been stolen from mining operations. It had been part of a CIA operation to fund covert activities in South America. The money had been intended for anti-communist insurgents, but corrupt officials had tried to divert it for personal gain. Virgil and his team had intercepted the shipment before it could disappear. But here was the twist. Virgil hadn't been a rogue agent stealing from the government. He'd been following orders. Direct orders from Mitchell Brennan, a senior official at Justice, to secure the gold and hold it until a proper chain of custody could be established. The memo explicitly stated that the gold was not to be turned over to any agency until Brennan personally authorized it. That authorization had never come. Wes kept reading. A letter from Brennan to Virgil, dated September 1974. "The situation is more complicated than we anticipated. There are parties within the government who want this gold to disappear. They will claim it for legitimate operations, but their intentions are not clean. I need you to keep it secure. Trust no one but me." Another letter from November 1974. "They're investigating Desert Sky Transport as a cover. Let them investigate. Say nothing. The less connection there is between you and the gold, the safer you'll be. I'm working on a solution, but these things take time." And then a final letter dated January 1975. "Virgil, I've been removed from my position. They know I was protecting the gold, and they've forced me out. I don't know if you'll receive this letter or if it will be intercepted. If you're reading this, destroy all evidence of our correspondence. Keep the gold hidden. I'll find another way to make this right, but it may take years. Be patient, be careful, and above all, keep it away from Cole. He's been compromised." Wes set the letters down carefully, his mind racing. Virgil hadn't stolen the gold. He'd been protecting it under orders from a superior who'd then been purged from the government for trying to do the right thing. And Cole had been compromised, which meant he'd been working for the corrupt officials all along. There were more documents, official badges and credentials showing that Virgil had indeed been a federal agent, not just someone posing as one. a commendation from 1973 for outstanding service in the disruption of international smuggling operations. And buried at the bottom, a photocopy of Cole's personnel file showing that he'd been investigated in 1975 for conduct unbecoming and possible corruption. Though no charges had ever been filed, the picture was finally complete. Virgil had been a patriot trying to protect government assets from corrupt officials. Cole had been one of those corrupt officials, playing both sides and eventually stealing his share when he realized there would be no consequences. And the FBI showing up now meant that someone, somewhere, still cared about that missing gold, or at least about making sure it didn't surface to expose old scandals. Wes pulled out his phone and called Kelly. She answered on the first ring. "Dad, did you send those documents I asked for?" "Not yet." "Kelly, I need you to come out here. I need your help in person. Dad, I can't just drop everything. Please." He heard the crack in his own voice. "I know I don't have the right to ask, but this is important. And it's not just about me. It's about something bigger than I can handle alone." There was a long pause. "Then what's going on? Are you in trouble?" "Yes, but it's the kind of trouble that might actually lead somewhere good. I can't explain it over the phone. Can you get time off work? Can you bring Mason? Mason's in school. And I'd need to—" She stopped. "Dad, how serious is this?" "FBI showed up today. They want to search the property. I have 24 hours to decide whether to cooperate or lawyer up." Kelly's voice changed, becoming sharp and focused. "Don't talk to them without a lawyer present. Don't sign anything. Don't give them permission to search. I'm calling my boss right now to see if I can take a few days. If I can, I'll drive out tonight. Thank you. Dad, just be careful, okay? Whatever Uncle Virgil left you, it's not worth getting arrested over." "I know. I'll be careful." The line went dead. Wes looked out the window at the property, at the land that had seemed so worthless 3 days ago, and now felt like the center of a 50-year-old conspiracy. Clyde was visible near the barn, peaceful in the late afternoon light, oblivious to federal investigations and corrupt officials, and the weight of history pressing down on 80 acres of West Texas. Wes spent the next few hours documenting everything. He photographed every page of the official documents, every entry in Virgil's journals, every piece of evidence that might prove his uncle's innocence and Cole's guilt. He uploaded the photos to a secure cloud account using his phone's sluggish internet connection, making sure there were backups in case anyone tried to seize the originals. Then he went outside and walked the property with Virgil's detailed inventory journal, mapping out exactly where each cache was buried. If this all went sideways, if the FBI seized everything, at least he'd know what had been there. At least there would be a record. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Wes stood in the orchard and thought about choices. Virgil had spent 50 years making the safe choice, hiding, waiting, protecting. And in the end, that choice had led nowhere except to an unmarked grave, and secrets passed on to someone else. Maybe the right choice wasn't the safe one. Maybe it was time to bring everything into the light. Consequences be damned. Headlights appeared on the access road just after dark. Wes tensed, then relaxed when he recognized the car. Kelly's Honda, practical and reliable just like her. She parked next to his truck and got out, looking tired and worried, and more beautiful than Wes remembered. Behind her, a boy climbed out of the passenger seat. Mason, 10 years old now, tall for his age, with Kelly's eyes and a serious expression that reminded Wes painfully of himself at that age. "Hey," Kelly said, walking toward him. "Hey." Wes wanted to hug her, but wasn't sure if he had the right. She made the decision for him, stepping forward and wrapping her arms around him briefly before stepping back. "This is Mason," she said. "Mason, this is your grandpa." The boy extended his hand formally. "Nice to meet you, sir." "Just Grandpa is fine," Wes said, shaking the small hand. "Or Wes, whichever feels right." They went inside, and Wes made coffee, while Kelly looked around the house with the kind of professional assessment that came from years of legal work. Mason sat at the table, quiet and observant, taking everything in. "Okay," Kelly said finally. "Show me what we're dealing with." Wes spread the documents across the table, the journals, the letters, the official memos, the photographs. Kelly read through everything methodically, making notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking questions. Mason watched, clearly understanding this was important even if he didn't understand why. After an hour, Kelly set down her pen and looked at Wes. "Dad, this is huge. If these documents are authentic, Uncle Virgil was essentially a whistleblower before that was even a term. He was protecting government assets from corrupt officials. So the gold is legal. It's complicated. The gold was seized legally, but its disposition was never resolved. Technically, it might still belong to the federal government. But if you can prove that Virgil was acting under orders to protect it, and that those orders were never countermanded, you might have a case for, well, not ownership, but at least for proper compensation as the custodian of the assets. What about Cole? Kelly's expression hardened. If his personnel file is accurate, Cole was under investigation for corruption. His claim to partnership is bogus. And if he did steal his portion of the gold years ago, he's already committed a crime. You could use that as leverage. Leverage for what? To negotiate. With the FBI, with the Justice Department, with whoever has jurisdiction over this mess. You offer to turn over all the gold, all the documentation, everything, in exchange for immunity for Uncle Virgil's actions and fair compensation for you as the inheritor of the property where it was stored. Wes stared at his daughter. You think they'd agree to that? I think they'd rather settle this quietly than have it become public that corrupt federal officials stole $350 million and the government covered it up for 50 years. This is the kind of scandal that brings down careers. They'll want it to go away. So we use the gold as leverage to make them pay us to keep quiet? Kelly shook her head. We use the gold as leverage to get justice. To clear Uncle Virgil's name, to make sure Cole doesn't get away with his crimes, and to get fair compensation for the risk and responsibility you've inherited. It's not blackmail. It's negotiation. Wes looked at Mason, who was listening intently.
What do you think, kid?
Your mom makes sense? Mason considered it seriously. I think Grandpa Virgil sounds like he was a good man who got put in a bad situation. And I think people should know that. Out of the mouths of children, Kelly smiled at her son, then looked at Wes. So here's what we do. Tomorrow morning, when the FBI comes back, you don't give them permission to search. But you tell them you're willing to cooperate fully through your attorney. That's me, by the way. I'm taking a leave of absence from the firm to represent you pro bono. Kelly, you can't. Yes, I can. This is family. And honestly, Dad, this is the most interesting case I've ever seen. If we handle it right, it could change everything. She paused. For all of us. Wes felt something in his chest loosen, some knot of anxiety and fear he'd been carrying for years. Not gone, but eased. For the first time since finding that first gold bar, he didn't feel alone in this. Okay, he said. We do it your way. We fight, Kelly nodded. We fight, but first we sleep. Tomorrow's gonna be a long day. They made up beds. Kelly in Virgil's room, Mason on the couch, Wes on the floor with a sleeping bag. Before turning out the lights, Wes went outside one more time to check on Clyde. The donkey was lying in his stall, peaceful and unconcerned. Things are about to get interesting. Old man, Wes said quietly. Clyde opened his good eye, regarded Wes with that patient wisdom that only animals seem to possess, and closed it again. Wes went back inside, where his daughter and grandson were sleeping under a roof he now owned, protecting secrets that were about to stop being secrets. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end, one way or another. Morning came with the harsh clarity of a decision made and no way back. Wes woke before dawn to find Kelly already up, sitting at the kitchen table with Virgil's documents spread around her and her laptop open. She dressed in what Wes recognized as her work clothes, sharp, professional, the armor she wore when facing opposition. I've been reading case law, she said without looking up. Asset forfeiture, whistleblower protection, estate inheritance in cases involving government property. We have precedent, Dad. Not a lot, but enough. Wes poured himself coffee and sat across from her. Through the window, the sky was starting to lighten, turning from black to deep blue. "How's it look?" "Like we have a shot. A real shot." Kelly closed her laptop and met his eyes. "But we need to document everything before the FBI gets here. We need photographs of the caches, measurements, proof that the gold matches the descriptions in the 1974 seizure reports. And we need to do it in the next few hours." "That's a lot of digging. Then we better get started." Mason woke as they were preparing, emerging from his nest of blankets on the couch, looking rumpled and young. "Can I help?" Kelly started to say no, then paused. "Actually, yes. You can photograph everything. Use my phone. It's got a better camera than Dad's." They worked together as the sun rose, the three of them moving across the property like a team that had been doing this for years instead of hours. Wes dug where Virgil's journal indicated, following the detailed coordinates and markers. Kelly measured and documented. Mason photographed everything, the holes, the caches, the gold bars with their distinctive stamps, the surrounding landscape for context. Clyde followed them from site to site, occasionally indicating spots that Virgil's journal had marked as Clyde's memory, locations the donkey had been trained to remember even without written coordinates. The animal's presence was calming somehow, a reminder that this had been Virgil's life's work and they were just finishing what he'd started. By 9 a.m., they documented 12 separate caches, enough to prove the scope of what was buried here without excavating the entire property. Kelly had photographs, measurements and notes that could be cross-referenced with the official 1974 seizure reports. If the FBI challenged their claims, they had proof. "That's all we can do before they arrive," Kelly said, checking her watch. "Now we prepare for the conversation." They returned to the house and cleaned up, washing off the dirt and sweat. Kelly laid out her strategy while they worked. "When Agent Reeves gets here, I do the talking. You answer only direct questions, and you keep your answers short. Don't volunteer information. Don't get emotional. This is a negotiation, not a confession. What if they demand to search anyway? We tell them we're willing to provide access, under supervision, with documentation, and only after we've reached an agreement about how the discovery will be handled. We're not obstructing justice. We're protecting our rights." Wes nodded, trying to absorb it all. Kelly was good at this, confident in a way he'd never been confident about anything. She'd gotten that from her mother, that certainty. He'd just given her his stubbornness. "Dad," Kelly said, and her voice was softer now, "whatever happens today, I want you to know I'm glad you called me. I'm glad we're doing this together." Before Wes could respond, Mason called from the window. "Cars coming. 3 vehicles this time, the 2 FBI trucks from yesterday, and a black sedan that looked government but different. They parked in formation, deliberate and coordinated, and 7 people got out. Agent Reeves was there along with her team from yesterday, but the sedan had brought 3 new players, 2 men in suits and a woman who carried herself with the kind of authority that made everyone else look like backup." Kelly straightened her blazer and picked up her briefcase. "Let's go." They met the agents in the yard, halfway between the house and the vehicles. Agent Reeves approached with the same professional neutrality as before, but her eyes flicked to Kelly with recognition. "Another lawyer, another complication." "Mr. Hanley," Reeves said, "have you made a decision about our request?" "I'm Kelly Hanley." Kelly stepped forward. "Mr. Hanley's attorney. My client is willing to cooperate fully with your investigation, subject to certain conditions." The woman from the sedan moved forward. She was in her 50s, grey-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of face that had seen everything and wasn't impressed by much. "I'm Deputy Director Marsh, FBI. What conditions?" Kelly didn't flinch. "First, immunity for Virgil Hanley posthumously. He was operating under orders from Justice Department officials in 1974. We have documentation to prove it. Second, fair market compensation to Wes Hanley for the preservation and custody of government property for 50 years. Third, full investigation into Raymond Cole's actions in 1974 and subsequently. He was under investigation for corruption, stole his portion of the recovered assets, and is now making false claims against this property." Deputy Director Marsh studied Kelly for a long moment. "That's quite a list. You have proof?" Extensive documentation, official correspondence, classified memos, personnel files. Everything you'll need to understand what really happened in Operation Desert Shield. And if we refuse your conditions, then this becomes public. The media learns that corrupt federal officials stole $350 million, that the government covered it up, and that an honest agent spent 50 years protecting the assets because he couldn't trust his own superiors. That's not a story any of us wants in the news. Marsh's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. A subtle acknowledgement that Kelly had leverage. You're suggesting we pay you to keep quiet. I'm suggesting we reach an equitable settlement that serves justice and avoids unnecessary scandal. My client isn't asking for the gold. He's asking for fair compensation and the clearing of his uncle's name. Those seem like reasonable requests given the circumstances. Assuming your documentation is authentic. Kelly pulled a folder from her briefcase. Photocopies. You can verify the originals yourselves. We have Mitchell Brennan's direct orders to Virgil Hanley. We have classified memos about Operation Desert Shield. And we have evidence that Raymond Cole was compromised and later stole government property. Marsh took the folder and paged through it, her face unreadable. After a few minutes, she looked at Agent Reeves. Get Mitchell Brennan on the phone. He's retired, but he's still alive. I want confirmation. Reeves pulled out her phone and walked away. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Mason stood close to Wes, trying to look brave but clearly nervous. Wes put a hand on his grandson's shoulder, feeling the boy relax slightly at the contact. While we wait, Marsh said, why don't you tell me what's actually buried on this property? Kelly glanced at Wes, who nodded. She pulled out her phone and showed Marsh the photographs from this morning, the gold bars, the caches, the systematic documentation they'd created. Approximately $340 million in gold bullion, Kelly said, scattered across the property in 47 separate locations. All of it matches the descriptions from the 1974 Desert Shield seizure reports. We can provide exact coordinates and access to verify inventory. Marsh studied the photos carefully. Your uncle was thorough. My uncle was protecting what he'd been ordered to protect, Wes said, even when it cost him everything. Marsh looked at him directly for the first time. What did it cost him, Mr. Hanley? His life. He spent 50 years alone out here, afraid to use what he was guarding, afraid to tell anyone the truth, afraid that the wrong people would find out. He died with nobody around him except that donkey over there. Wes pointed to Clyde, who was watching the proceedings with his usual patience. That's what happens when you try to do the right thing in a system that's corrupt. That's quite an accusation. It's quite a story. And it's all true. You're going to find that out when you check those documents. Agent Reeves returned, her expression carefully neutral. Deputy Director, I have Mitchell Brennan. He's willing to talk, but only if we agree not to record the conversation. Marsh took the phone and walked out of earshot. The conversation lasted 10 minutes, during which Kelly, Wes, and Mason stood in the yard with federal agents surrounding them like they were witnesses to something bigger than themselves. Which Wes realized they were. When Marsh returned, her expression had changed. Not friendly exactly, but less adversarial. She handed the phone back to Reeves and turned to Kelly. Mr. Brennan confirms your story. He gave Virgil Hanley direct orders to secure the Desert Shield assets and hold them pending further instruction. Those instructions never came because Mr. Brennan was forced out of his position before he could complete the operation. So you agree that Virgil Hanley was acting under legitimate authority? We agree that he believed he was acting under legitimate authority. Whether that authority was legally valid after Mr. Brennan's dismissal is a question for the Justice Department. But Marsh paused, choosing her words carefully. We also acknowledge that your uncle spent 50 years protecting government property that many others would have simply stolen. That demonstrates a level of integrity that deserves recognition. What about Raymond Cole? We'll be opening an investigation into Mr. Cole's actions. If he stole his portion of the gold, he'll be prosecuted. If he's making false claims against this property, we'll address that as well. Kelly pressed forward. And compensation for my client. Marsh considered this. The government doesn't typically pay citizens to return stolen property, even property that was stolen from us. But you do pay whistleblowers. You do compensate individuals who help recover lost assets. And you definitely settle cases when the alternative is public embarrassment on a scale that would make Watergate look like a parking ticket. A ghost of a smile crossed Marsh's face. You're direct. I learned from my father.
So what's your offer?
We need to inventory everything. Verify the authenticity. Confirm the amounts match our records. That will take time, weeks, maybe months. During that process, this property will be secured as an active investigation site. Your client can remain on the property, but cannot remove or sell any of the assets. And after the inventory, we'll propose a settlement. Based on Mr. Brennan's testimony and the documentation you've provided, I'm authorized to offer fair market compensation for the preservation of the assets. Let's say 5% of the total value. Kelly didn't hesitate. 15%. And full immunity for both Virgil and Wes Hanley in writing, signed by the Attorney General. That's non-negotiable. My client and his uncle protected $340 million in government assets for 50 years. They did your job when your own people couldn't be trusted to do it. 15% is more than fair. It's generous on our part. Marsh looked at Agent Reeves, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I'll need to make calls. Get authorization. But if the inventory confirms your numbers, and if the documentation holds up under scrutiny, I think we can reach an agreement. How long? Give me 48 hours. We'll bring in a team to start the inventory process. You'll need to provide access to the property and cooperation with our specialists. In return, we'll begin drafting the settlement documents. Kelly extended her hand. 48 hours. After that, we go public and let the court sort it out. Marsh shook her hand. Understood. Miss Hanley, your father's lucky to have you. No, Kelly said, glancing at Wes. I'm lucky to have him. It just took me a while to remember that. The agents left, leaving behind 2 personnel to secure the property and begin preliminary documentation. As their vehicles disappeared down the access road, Wes felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope mixed with exhaustion, relief mixed with disbelief. Did that just happen? He asked. That just happened, Kelly confirmed. We still have work to do. The inventory, the negotiations, making sure they follow through. But Dad, we did it. We actually did it. Mason tugged on Wes's shirt. Grandpa, does this mean we're rich? Wes knelt down to his grandson's level. It means we did the right thing. The money, if it comes, that's just a nice result. But what matters is that we told the truth and stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself anymore. Grandpa Virgil? That's right, Mason considered this seriously. I think he'd be proud of you. Wes felt his throat tighten. I hope so, kid. I really hope so. They spent the rest of the day working with the FBI personnel, showing them the documented cache sites, providing access to the journals and maps. It was strange, having federal agents digging in the orchard where just days ago Wes had been digging alone. But it also felt right, like secrets finally coming into the light where they belonged. That evening, after the agents had left for the night, and Mason was asleep on the couch, Wes and Kelly sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Clyde was visible in the moonlight, grazing peacefully, his job finally complete. Thank you, Wes said, for coming out here, for believing me, for everything. You gave me a chance to be part of something that matters, Kelly replied. I've spent 3 years pushing papers at a law firm, dealing with contracts and disputes that don't mean anything. This is real. This is justice. Your mother would be proud of you, Kelly smiled. Maybe. She always said I got your stubborn streak. I used to think that was an insult. Now I'm not so sure. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared purpose and old bonds beginning to mend. Inside, Mason was dreaming. On the property, $340 million in gold was waiting to be inventoried and returned to government coffers. And somewhere, Wes hoped, Virgil Hanley's spirit could finally rest. Knowing his secret was safe and his legacy was secure, tomorrow would bring more work, more negotiations. More inventory, more careful navigation of a system that had failed Virgil 50 years ago. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Wes Hanley felt like maybe life still had surprises worth discovering. Sometimes they even turned out good. The third day brought Raymond Cole. Wes saw the SUV coming from a mile away, dust rising behind it like a warning flag. He was standing in the orchard, with two FBI agents who were carefully excavating one of the larger caches, documenting every bar. When Kelly came running from the house, "Cole's here," she said, slightly breathless. And he brought his lawyers. 3 of them. Wes looked at the FBI agents who'd stopped their work and were watching the approaching vehicle with professional interest. "You'll want to hear this," he said. They all walked to the front of the property, where Cole was climbing out of his SUV, along with 3 men in expensive suits carrying briefcases. Cole looked angry, not the controlled, calculating anger from their first meeting, but something raw. "Desperate, maybe. You can't do this," Cole said, pointing at Wes. "That gold is mine. Half of it is mine. We had an agreement, Mr. Cole." Kelly stepped forward, her voice calm and professional. "I'm Kelly Hanley, representing Wes Hanley and the estate of Virgil Hanley. If you have legal claims against this property, you'll need to file them through proper channels. Right now, this is an active federal investigation site, and you're trespassing." One of Cole's lawyers moved forward. "We have documentation showing a valid partnership agreement between Raymond Cole and Virgil Hanley, dated 1974. That agreement entitles Mr. Cole to 50% of all jointly acquired assets. May I see that documentation?" Kelly asked. The lawyer produced a folder. Kelly took it and flipped through the pages, her expression neutral. After a minute, she looked up. "This is interesting. According to this partnership agreement, all 3 partners, Virgil Hanley, James Hendricks, and Raymond Cole, were entitled to equal shares of jointly acquired assets. That would be 33% each, not 50%. Cole's face reddened. "Hendricks is dead. His share reverts to the surviving partners." "Does it? Because I don't see any provision in this agreement for what happens when a partner dies. And since Mr. Hendricks's estate was never notified of this partnership or given an opportunity to claim his share, you may have a problem." "This is ridiculous," Cole snapped. "I've waited 50 years for this. Virgil promised me—" "Actually," Kelly interrupted, "according to Virgil's journals, which we provided to the FBI, you stole your portion of the partnership assets in the early 1980s. You dug up your share and sold it, which means you've already received your distribution and have no further claim." The silence that followed was absolute. Cole stared at Kelly, then at Wes, his expression cycling through shock, fury, and something close to panic. One of his lawyers leaned in and whispered something, but Cole waved him off. "You can't prove that," Cole said. "We can," Kelly replied. "We have journal entries, dates, locations. Virgil tracked your movements. He knew you'd betrayed the agreement. And if you'd like, we can have the FBI investigate where your current assets came from. I'm sure they'd be interested in the source of the capital you used to start your construction business in 1983. Cole's lawyer pulled him aside. There was a hushed, urgent conversation. The other lawyers joined in, all of them speaking in low tones, while Wes and Kelly and the FBI agent stood waiting. Finally, Cole broke away from the group and approached Wes directly. "$25 million, Cole said. "Cash. I'll drop all claims, sign whatever you want. Just give me $25 million and we're done." "No," Wes said simply. $30 million. "That's my final offer. It's a fraction of what's here, and you know it. Take it and everyone walks away happy." "The gold isn't mine to sell," Wes said. "It belongs to the government. We're just making sure it gets returned to the right people." Cole's face twisted. "You self-righteous? Do you have any idea what Virgil and I went through to get that gold? What we risked? We saved it from people who would have used it to fund terrorism, drug cartels, weapons trafficking. We were heroes, and the government threw us to the wolves. That gold is ours by right. Then why did you steal your share and sell it?" Wes asked quietly. "If you were such a hero, why did you betray the agreement? Why did you abandon Virgil?" Cole had no answer. He stood there, breathing hard, his lawyers shifting uncomfortably behind him. After a long moment, he turned and walked back to his SUV. "This isn't over," he called back. "I'll fight this. I'll tie you up in court for years. You'll spend every penny you might get just paying lawyers." "Mr. Cole," one of the FBI agents stepped forward, badge visible. "I'm Agent Reeves. I need you to come with me. We have some questions about your actions in 1974 and your disposal of government property in the 1980s. Cole stopped. "You can't. I have rights. I want my lawyer." "You have 3 of them right here," Reeves said. "I'm sure they can help. But you need to come with us now." The other agents moved forward, and suddenly Cole was being guided. Not arrested, not quite, but definitely not free to leave on his own terms, toward one of the FBI vehicles. His lawyers started protesting, threatening, pulling out phones to call judges and officials and anyone who might help. But it was over. Cole knew it, and so did everyone watching. 50 years of waiting, planning, scheming, and it had all come down to this moment in a dusty ranch yard, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal and the ghosts of choices made long ago. As the FBI vehicle drove away with Cole in the back seat, Wes felt Kelly's hand slip into his. Mason emerged from the house where he'd been watching through the window, his expression a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Is he gone?" Mason asked. "He's gone," Wes confirmed. "Good. He seemed mean." Kelly laughed, and the sound broke the tension like sunlight through clouds. "Yeah, kid. He was definitely mean." They stood together, the 3 of them, watching the dust settle and the normal sounds of the ranch returning. Clyde braying in the distance, birds calling from the mesquite trees, the wind moving through the dry grass. "What happens now?" Mason asked. Wes looked at his grandson, then at Kelly, then at the land that had been Virgil's burden and was now his legacy. "Now we finish what we started. We help them recover everything. We clear Virgil's name, and we figure out what comes next. Together." Mason asked. "Together," Wes confirmed, squeezing Kelly's hand, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, that felt like enough. The inventory took 3 weeks. FBI specialists worked methodically across the property, excavating each cache site, cataloging every bar, verifying serial numbers against the 1974 seizure records. Wes, Kelly, and Mason stayed on the ranch through it all, watching 50 years of secrets finally come into the light. Clyde seemed to understand his role was complete. The donkey spent his days grazing peacefully, occasionally wandering over to watch the dig sites with his cloudy eye, then moving on, as if satisfied the job was being done right. Wes made sure he got extra feed and attention, the least he could do for an animal who'd been Virgil's faithful companion and unlikely co-conspirator. Kelly had taken a leave of absence from her firm, setting up a temporary office in Virgil's house. She fielded calls from Deputy Director Marsh, coordinated with the FBI teams, and worked on the settlement documents that would formalize everything. Mason attended school remotely, doing his lessons on Kelly's laptop, between exploring the property and asking Wes to teach him about ranch work. It was strange having family around. Strange in a good way. The house that had felt empty and haunted 3 weeks ago now felt lived in, purposeful. Kelly made coffee in the mornings. Mason left his shoes by the door. They ate dinner together at the kitchen table where gold bars had once sat, talking about the day's progress and making plans for what came next. On day 18 of the inventory, Agent Reeves brought the final count to the house. Wes, Kelly, and Deputy Director Marsh gathered around the kitchen table while Reeves read from her report. Total recovery, 47 cache sites. 4,027 gold bars. Current market value, $342.8 million. Reeves looked up. Every single bar matches the 1974 Desert Shield seizure records. "Your uncle didn't touch any of it. 50 years, Wes said quietly. "He guarded it for 50 years and never took a single bar. That level of integrity is rare," Marsh said, "which is why we're prepared to offer a settlement that reflects it." She produced a document and slid it across the table to Kelly, who read through it carefully, making notes in the margins. After 10 minutes, she looked up. 15% of recovered value. That's $51.4 million. Plus full immunity for both Virgil and Wes Hanley, certified by the Attorney General. plus a formal commendation for Virgil Hanley, recognizing his service and sacrifice. Kelly looked at Marsh. This is acceptable. There's one more thing, Marsh said. Mitchell Brennan, the Justice Department official who originally ordered your uncle to secure the gold, he'd like to meet you. He's 89 now, retired in Virginia. But he wants to thank you personally for finishing what he and Virgil started. Wes felt something catch in his throat. I'd like that. The signing happened 2 days later in a conference room at the FBI field office in San Antonio. Lawyers on both sides, officials from Justice, representatives from the Treasury Department. Kelly sat beside Wes, walking him through each document, making sure he understood what he was signing. This is it, she said quietly. Once you sign, the gold belongs to the government. In return, you receive the settlement, immunity, and Virgil's commendation. Are you sure? Wes looked at the papers, at the dollar amounts that could have changed everything if he'd decided to run, to hide, to keep the gold for himself. But that wasn't what Virgil had wanted. It wasn't what Virgil had spent his life protecting, I'm sure, Wes said, and signed. The aftermath moved quickly. The gold was transported to federal vaults. The settlement funds were transferred to an account Kelly had set up. News stories ran for a few days. Historic gold recovery in West Texas. FBI closes 50-year-old case, but the media attention faded quickly. The government wanted it quiet, and so did Wes. Raymond Cole was charged with theft of government property and fraud. His trial was set for 6 months out. According to Kelly's sources, he'd tried to make a deal, offering information about other corrupt officials in exchange for leniency. The Justice Department was considering it. Mitchell Brennan sent a letter to Wes before they could arrange a visit. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. Your uncle was the finest man I ever knew. He could have taken the gold and run. He could have sold me out to save himself. Instead, he stayed true to his duty even when that duty became unbearable. I'm sorry I couldn't protect him better. I'm sorry he had to carry that burden alone. But I'm grateful. More grateful than I can express that he had family like you to finish what we started. Thank you, Wes. Thank you for giving Virgil the ending he deserved. Wes read the letter sitting on the porch with Clyde nearby. The sun setting over land that was truly his now. The settlement had paid off every debt, left him with more money than he'd ever imagined having, and given him something more valuable than gold, a family restored and a legacy honored. That evening, Kelly found him there. She sat beside him, both of them watching the sky turn pink and orange and deep purple. I've been thinking, she said. Mason and we could move out here. I can work remotely, and it would be good for him to have space, fresh air. To know his grandfather. Wes turned to her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. You'd want that? I'd want that, if you would. Kelly, there's nothing I'd want more, she smiled. And for the first time in years, Wes saw his daughter as she'd been before disappointment and distance had built walls between them. Young, hopeful, believing that good things were still possible. Then let's do it, she said. Let's build something here. Something that lasts. Wes pulled her into a hug, this woman who'd saved him, who'd believed in him when he'd given her every reason not to. They sat like that as the stars emerged, father and daughter, beginning again on land that had witnessed the end of one man's secret and the start of another's redemption. Inside, Mason was making dinner, something he'd insisted on, a recipe he'd learned at school. The smell of cooking drifted through the open windows, mixing with the evening air and the sound of Clyde settling into his stall for the night. Tomorrow, they'd start planning renovations to the house, fixing up the barn, maybe adding on a room for Mason. They'd figure out what to do with the money, investments, college funds, maybe a foundation like Virgil had wanted, but tonight was for gratitude, for second chances, for the family that had found its way back to each other through gold and grief and the stubborn faith that doing the right thing might actually mean something. Dad? Kelly said quietly. Yeah? Thank you. For calling me. For letting me be part of this. Thank you for answering, Wes replied. For coming when I needed you. They sat together as the night deepened, the ranch settling into peaceful silence around them, and for the first time in longer than Wes could remember, He felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Home. 6 months had changed everything and nothing at all. The ranch still sat on 80 acres of West Texas, the land still hard and unforgiving under the sun. But the house had been repaired. New roof, painted walls, windows that actually kept out the dust. The barn stood straight now, reinforced and weatherproofed, with a proper stall for Clyde that included a heated waterer for winter and a fan for summer. The orchard had been replanted, young trees that would need years to bear fruit, but represented something important: faith in the future. Wes stood on the porch in the early morning light, coffee in hand, watching his grandson lead Clyde through a series of exercises the veterinarian had prescribed. The donkey's cataracts had been treated. They couldn't restore full vision, but Clyde could see better now than he had in years. The animal moved with what Wes could only describe as contentment, secure in his routine and the people who cared for him. Mason had taken to ranch life like he'd been born to it. 10 years old and already responsible for feeding routines, grooming, basic maintenance. The boy had a quiet confidence around the animals that reminded Wes of himself at that age. Before life had taught him to doubt everything, Kelly emerged from the house with her own coffee, settling into the chair beside him. She'd traded her law firm wardrobe for jeans and work shirts, though she still disappeared into her office for hours at a time, handling legal work, different cases now, pro bono mostly, helping people who couldn't afford representation. The settlement money meant she could choose her cases based on what mattered, rather than what paid. Mitchell Brennan called, Kelly said. He wants to visit next month. Says he's finally strong enough for the trip. I'd like that, Wes replied. There are things I want to ask him about Virgil. About what it was like, carrying that kind of secret. I think he has the same questions for you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Mason coax Clyde through figure eights. The donkey complied with patient tolerance, occasionally turning his head to give the boy an affectionate nudge. The foundation had been established 3 months ago, the Virgil Hanley Foundation for Rural Communities. Its mission was simple: help struggling ranchers and farmers stay on their land. Equipment grants, low-interest loans, educational programs. Kelly ran it from her office here, working with agricultural extension services and rural development agencies. They'd already helped 12 families avoid foreclosure. The commendation for Virgil had been presented at a small ceremony in San Antonio. No media, just family, and a few FBI officials, including Deputy Director Marsh. They'd given Wes a framed certificate and a flag that had flown over the Justice Department building. Both hung now in the ranch house, alongside photographs of Virgil, including some Wes had never seen before, provided by Mitchell Brennan. Young Virgil in uniform, Virgil receiving awards. Virgil standing with Brennan, both men serious and purposeful. Raymond Cole had taken a plea deal, providing testimony about corruption in federal agencies during the 1970s in exchange for a reduced sentence. He'd served 7 years. His construction company had been sold to pay restitution. The news stories had been brief, buried in back sections where old crimes went to die quietly. Mom called, Kelly said. She asked about Thanksgiving. Wes looked at his daughter. They'd navigated this carefully, the relationship between him and his ex-wife Sarah. Civil conversations, updates about Mason, gradual thawing of old resentments. What did you tell her? That she's welcome here. If you're okay with it. Wes considered this. The ranch had 4 bedrooms now after the renovations. Room for family, for visits, for connections that had been broken but might be repaired with time and patience. I'm okay with it, he said. It would be good for Mason to have everyone together, Kelly smiled. You've changed, Dad, in good ways. I had good reasons to change. Mason finished with Clyde and came running up to the porch, breathless and grinning. Grandpa, can we check the south pasture? I think I saw wild turkeys out there yesterday. After breakfast, Wes said. Ranch rule. You always eat before you work. That's a good rule. Mason headed inside, already talking about what he wanted to make for breakfast. Wes and Kelly followed more slowly. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and the cinnamon rolls Kelly had started earlier. Mason was rummaging in the refrigerator, planning something ambitious that would probably involve every pan they owned. This was what Virgil had wanted, Wes realized. Not the money, though that helped. Not even the clearing of his name, though that mattered. What Virgil had wanted was for someone to build a life here, to take this land that had been his burden and his sanctuary and turn it into something living and good. After breakfast, Wes and Mason drove out to the south pasture in the old pickup, still running, though Wes could afford a new one now. He kept it because it had been Virgil's, because some things were worth maintaining even when easier options existed. They found the turkeys where Mason had reported, a small flock moving through the mesquite. Mason watched them through binoculars, patient and focused, while Wes checked the fence line and thought about the future. The settlement money was invested carefully, generating income that would support the foundation and provide security for Kelly and Mason. But more than that, it had bought time. Time to heal relationships, time to build something meaningful, time to be present in ways Wes had never managed before. They drove back as the sun reached its zenith, heat shimmering off the distant hills. Clyde was visible near the barn, standing in the shade, content in his retirement. The orchard was green with new growth. The house sat solid on its hill, no longer crumbling but restored, purposeful, inhabited by people who chose to be there. That evening, after dinner and after Mason had gone to bed, Wes walked out to Virgil's grave. They'd buried him properly in a small cemetery in Ozona, but Wes had placed a marker here too, a simple stone near the orchard, inscribed with Virgil's name and dates and the words, "He kept faith." Wes stood there in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, and spoke quietly to his uncle. "I think we did right by you. The gold's where it belongs. Your name is cleared, and this place, it's alive again. Kelly and Mason are here. We're building something good." The wind moved through the mesquite, carrying the smell of dust and distance. "Thank you," Wes continued, "for trusting me, for giving me a chance when I didn't have any left. I won't waste it. I promise you that." He stood there a few minutes longer, then walked back to the house, where lights glowed warm in the windows, and family waited. Clyde called from the barn, a sound that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. Tomorrow would bring work and plans and the ongoing process of building a life worth living, but tonight was for gratitude, for the gifts that came disguised as burdens, for the secrets that became blessings once they stopped being secrets, for the family that found its way home through gold and grace, and the stubborn faith that sometimes, against all odds, things worked out the way they were supposed to. Wes climbed the porch steps and went inside, closing the door on the darkness and opening himself to whatever came next. Sometimes life saved its biggest surprises for when you'd stopped expecting anything at all. And sometimes, just sometimes, those surprises turned out to be exactly what you needed, even if you didn't know you needed them until they arrived. The ranch was quiet now, settled into the peaceful rhythm of evening. Inside, Kelly was reading on the couch. Mason was already asleep, dreaming whatever dreams 10-year-old boys dreamed. And Wes Hanley, broke cowboy turned millionaire turned family man, sat at Virgil's old kitchen table and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Complete. The gold was gone, returned to government vaults and federal oversight. But what it had purchased, redemption, family, purpose, home, those things would last. Those things were worth more than all the gold in all the orchards in all the world. Wes picked up Virgil's pocket watch from where it sat on the shelf. He'd had it repaired, the mechanism cleaned and adjusted. It kept perfect time now, ticking steadily forward, marking moments that mattered. He wound it carefully, listening to the familiar sound, then set it back on the shelf where he could see it every day, a reminder that time moved on, that second chances were possible, that sometimes the inheritance that mattered most wasn't what you found buried in the ground, but what you built from the ground up with the people you loved. The ranch lights glowed against the darkness. Clyde settled in his stall. The orchard trees stretched toward stars that had witnessed everything, secrets buried and revealed, lives lived and ended, promises kept across generations, and in the quiet of a West Texas night, the Hanley family slept peacefully, secure in the home they'd built together from ruins and gold and stubborn, abiding faith that tomorrow would be better than yesterday, because sometimes it was.